has already informed me we are recording and we are ready to go. And the clock has just ticked over to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll go ahead and kick things off. So my name is Dave Higgins, and today, before we get started with anything budgeting related, we just want to walk you through a couple of different features within Zoom, so that way you feel very comfortable being a part of this presentation as we go through this. So a couple of things. For the purposes of this session, I've turned off your camera and your microphone features, so you don't have to worry about those. During the Q&A portion, and we are going to do a Q&A portion at the end of our session here, I am going to ask you all to send your questions over to me, and then we will use the Q&A feature within Zoom to answer those questions. Now, along the way, if you'd like to, if you're so inclined, you are more than welcome to send any chats my way along the way. If you want to comment on something, you're more than welcome to do so. But if you have any specific questions for me or about what we're talking about, just use that Q&A feature and we'll talk about it at the end. And then there may be some times I'm going to have a little bit of interaction with you all as we go through this. It's mostly one way, but I am going to do some interaction. So I would like for you all to interact with me very simply by just using that hand raise feature on the Zoom app there. So if you just use that, you'll be good to go. And you can simply click that hand raise feature one time to raise your hand and then a second time to lower it. And it's that simple. So with that being said, that's Zoom. Let's dive into a very quick disclaimer that we have to go through with this with all of you all. And that is a simple reminder that I am not a financial advisor. So the content of this training is purely for educational purposes, and the material doesn't take into account any sort of your particular financial objectives, your situation, or your needs. And it really isn't intended as recommendations specifically to you. In order to make the best financial decisions possible that will suit your needs, you really should conduct your own research as much as you possibly can, and then seek out the advice of a licensed financial advisor if necessary. So the whole purpose of today is to give you some baseline and some pieces, but if you're looking for very specific financial advice and help, we highly, highly advise you to reach out to a licensed financial advisor. So let's talk about what the basics are. Let's give you some of those basics, those frameworks, those structures for budgeting and just establishing positive financial habits. And welcome to this course as part of a week-long financial literacy week. We're super excited to have you all here to do some education, just to let people know what are some of the different tips and tricks and things that have helped many, many people who are well off in terms of financial stability and things. What are some of these tips that you can use in order to maybe get yourself a little bit more financially better situated than maybe what you are right now. So this whole session is really designed to empower you to live the life that you want to live by simply gaining control of your finances. So we're going to kick things off by doing a very quick, very simple little activity here. And I've got 3 statements on the screen, and we're going to go through each of these statements one at a time. So I'm going to read off the first statement, and if you agree with each of the statements as I read through them, just simply raise your hand for me so I can see if you agree with it or not. So let's start with that first statement. I personally struggle keeping track of my money. If you're someone who struggles, raise your virtual hand for me. Yeah, seeing that the hands coming in. Absolutely. All right, quite a few of you. All right. Go ahead and lower them for me. Let's look at the second statement. I am not prepared for unexpected expenses. Maybe car repairs, maybe medical bills. How about that? Raise your hands for me. Oh yeah, I see the hands ticking up there. That's a lot there. Yeah, unexpected ones, right? It's easy to run a budget sometimes with the unexpected stuff. That's what gets us. All right, you can go ahead and put those down. Let's do the last one. On average, I spend more money than I make. How about that? Yeah, there we go. Flying up, the numbers are flying up again. Absolutely. So you can go ahead and put your hands down for me. Thank you all for participating in that with me. So it is very common for many of us to struggle to keep up with their finances, to spend above our means, to just find ourselves unprepared, especially for those unexpected circumstances. So in the United States, it really is a tragedy that a lot of us have received very little or no access to any sort of financial education. I can certainly speak for myself. I went through my entire primary grades up through high school, really all the way through college, and didn't really get any of the tips that we're going to talk about in here today, and a lot of the tips that we're going to talk about in all of Financial Literacy Week. And I really wish I had learned that stuff, because it would have put me in a much better position than I am right now. So as a result of many of us not receiving that education, we may not be equipped with the skills necessary to set up and achieve financial goals for ourselves without falling into large amounts of debt. So let's face it, life is very, very, very expensive, and it's important to develop an awareness of your personal relationship to money and all of the tools as well to help you gain control of your finances. So that's where we're going to come here to help you out and help you empower you to make some more informed decisions about how to save money properly, how to spend money properly, and those sorts of things. So before we get into any particulars here, let's look at the goals for our particular session. What are we trying to achieve here? So our main goal today is to identify some strategies that will help you track your income, track your expenses, as well as some strategies to help you find and use data, things that are already at your fingertips, to help create a budget for you that works personally for you. The next goal we have is to explore some personal values that may drive some of the financial decision making that you're making there. So a lot of times people don't relate finances and values. Well, we're going to kind of show you that maybe they do to you, maybe they do. And then finally, we're also going to identify some personal strengths and some weaknesses that you have that will help you lead a more effective managing of your budget, or may also cause some problems for you in terms of the financial habits you may have. And then once we've covered all three of those things, we'll have an opportunity at the end, about maybe 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer than that, to participate in a full Q&A with myself, and maybe we give you some additional tips and tricks. So before we get into the budgeting itself, I want to kind of visualize them. I want to kind of put a visual image in your mind, right? So what I want you to do is just simply think about the space, your home space, wherever you live, wherever you call home. Think about that home space for a second, right? So take a second, just think about it. Your home, what's it look like to you? So are you a person who would describe your home as clean? Maybe you describe it as cluttered. Maybe it's messy. Maybe it's perfectly spotless, right? Do you prefer a home that is perfectly, squeaky clean, or maybe a little bit lived in? So think about that home, and wherever you live right now, how does it look? How does it feel after you just cleaned it, right? Everything's where it should be. All the nooks and crannies are free of buildup. There's no unidentified smells or anything like that, right? There's just little to no clutter, and it feels good, right? It feels good. Even if you're a person who prefers a space that's a little bit more lived in, it feels good to have a clean space. Well, we can think of financial planning and budgeting as very similar to maintaining that clean space, that clean home. So step one, in terms of your home, right? Step one is determining a baseline for what you consider to be a clean home for yourself, right? So you would take stock of where everything is in your house, and where it should be. And then in the budgeting sense, on the money side, the financial side, this would be the equivalent of determining just where's all my income? Where's all my expenses that I'm paying for, right? Just understanding how you save, how you spend, right? So the home on the cleanliness side, right? Like, where is everything? And then on the finances side is, where is everything also? But I'm looking at, again, my income, my expenses, where is all of that stuff? All right, so that's kind of the first step in this. The second step in this is determining, in terms of relation to a home, is why having a clean home matters to you. So for example, if it's important for you, if you're a person who likes a super, super tidy house and a messy home makes you feel uncomfortable, you can leverage that awareness in order to motivate yourself to develop a cleaning routine for your house. Well, same sort of thing goes with finances. Determining your values and your goals in terms of your finances is the second step towards budgeting and coming up with a budgeting system that works well for you. So for example, if you are a person who values a lot of financial freedom for yourself, then you can use that tool, or use that as a tool to motivate yourself to build some wealth now. The third step, the final step really, is to create and maintain some sort of cleaning routine for your house that works for you. So in the world of financial planning, this would be the budgeting structure that we're talking about, right? A plan that works for you at your home in terms of keeping it clean and tidy. And then also in the terms of financial planning, this is the budgeting, this is the planning. A lot of budgeting is planning. So it'll help you actually achieve your financial goals. So you use step 1 and 2 that we just talked through to guide yourself on how to structure your budget. And again, that's different for everybody. Everybody's budget is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk through that. And then step 3 is where you actually come up with that budget. You actually put all the pieces together. So we're going to think of budgeting itself as really a two-part process. And let's actually explore that here right now. Now, the first part of a budgeting process is simply tracking. What are we tracking? What types of stuff are we tracking? Well, you're going to track your income. You're going to track your essential expenses. You're going to track your non-essential expenses. Just your general spending habits to determine some sort of average trend in the way your income comes in and how you spend money. So that's part 1. Part 2 is the allocation portion of it. So this involves identifying your own personal financial strengths, your weaknesses, and those values again to help determine a good level of spending and a good saving strategy for yourself. So again, we tie back again to the values, because a lot of people don't necessarily put those two together. They don't tie values into their finances a lot, but that can be a huge part of it in helping you determine a lifestyle which you're comfortable with and you can save money like you want to. So this two-step process requires a certain degree, let's call it personal accountability. It takes a lot of personal accountability to do this. And it really is only effective, this tracking, this allocating, it really only works when you commit to it. Otherwise, your expenses, certain things you're paying for may fall through the cracks. You may forget about certain things, and you're not going to have an accurate financial picture for how exactly you're spending your money and how your money's coming into you. Your continued commitment, that accountability to your budget, is what will keep you effectively moving towards whatever financial goal that you're going to set for yourself. So again, accountability is a huge, huge part of it. So we have established the two-part process, that's budgeting. Now we can start working on the first part. So let's dive into these two pieces just a little bit more, and we're going to start with tracking. So let's look at some considerations when related to tracking of both income and of expenses, both tracking income and tracking expenses. Now, before we begin, I'm gonna pull you all into this one a little bit with me here. I would like you to very simply do this. Raise your virtual hand for me if you consider yourself to be a person who is good at tracking all of the income that you have. If you're good at tracking income, raise your virtual hand for me. All right, a lot of hands on this one. Awesome. Quite a few. Love to see that. All right, you can put your hands down. Perfect. Now the harder question, right? And be honest, right? No one else can see you in here, right? So if you are a person who is really good in your opinion of tracking all of your expenses now, go ahead and raise your virtual hand for me. Yeah, there we go. A lot fewer hands this time. As I'm not surprised, right? So it's totally fine, right? So thank you all. You can go ahead and put your hands down. All of us are going to fall into a very wide spectrum when it comes to how much experience we have with managing our finances. And some of this information we're going to be talking through is newer to some people, and some of it might be some things that you already know about. Our intention is to provide everybody here with just a couple different example frameworks and things to just consider so that you can personally identify and engage with your finances in maybe a different way than you maybe have done it in the past, right? So some of this stuff may be new to you, some of it may be old to you, but we challenge all of you to look at this stuff and go, maybe there's a better way to do it. Maybe there is something in here that I can take, a thread of something I can use in order to just set myself up financially in the future better. So keep that in mind as we continue to go through this, and use this entire session that we're going through here as an opportunity to just reflect on the pieces of the session that resonate with you most and use them to your benefit and to your advantage. All right, so let's talk about the very first thing. Go back to those two steps, right? Tracking was the first step that we had. Let's talk a little bit about tracking. We're going to start with one of the first things that you should be tracking, regardless of how you do your budgeting system, and that's with income. So quickly defining it, income. It's the money that you receive regularly in exchange either actively for working or maybe what we call passively for maybe investments or a pension, or maybe you have a legal or a government benefit, something like that. Now, how do you begin tracking all of these things? Well, the first step is to identify your post-tax income. And let's look at some factors to consider when you're actually trying to track all of that various different income that you might have. Maybe you just have one income, and that's totally fine too. So there's 4 factors to consider when you're determining your income. You're looking at all this stuff, right? So first, how many forms of income do you receive? So in addition to the active income, or the income, I guess, that you actively earn, say from a job, then you also want to consider and account for any sort of passive or one-time sources of income that you might receive. So for example, this might include things like a tax refund or monetary gifts that you get. So if you're someone who, let's say you have a side hustle, right? That income, all of those sorts of things should be accounted for when you're trying to put together, what are all my different types of income that I've got. Second thing is, how frequently do you receive that income? So identify, especially in the active income, things like your job, identify how often are you paid? Is it bi-weekly? Is it monthly? Is it annually? Somewhere in between, right? Just take that into account. The third thing is, how often do you, how much do you receive in each paycheck? So identify how much money you're working with every single pay period that you go through. Every time you get income, how much are you actually getting? And then fourth, last but not least, is how are you actually paid? Are you paid in cash? Are you paid through check, through a direct deposit to your bank? All of these things, each of these 4 things will help you determine the best budgeting strategy for later on when we go through the different budgeting strategies. So again, keep those things in mind the answers to those 4 questions. Now, based on your frequency of payment, determine your tracking time frame as well. Based on the answer to these 4 questions, you want to try to determine, okay, what's my time frame? How long should I be tracking this money, right? We don't want to necessarily track my whole life. I want to do it in chunks. So it's common for most people to track income on a monthly basis, right? A monthly budget, monthly basis, monthly income. That's how most people do it. But it really is up to you to decide however you want to do it that makes the most sense for you. Everybody's situation is different. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. But again, just keep in mind that if it's over a long period of time, if you don't receive money, every 2 weeks or every week or whatever it is, if it's over a longer period, maybe a month, maybe longer, then you might want to track and budget for that income over time. If your income primarily comes from some short-term work or maybe from contracting, then you might receive it in cash, something like that. It may be more beneficial for you as an individual to track your income on a daily basis rather than over a longer period. So again, just keep all these sorts of things in mind. Yep. Your income determines how much money you have to spend or to save over a set period of time. Keep in mind that the goal of budgeting is to consistently save and spend within your means. I'm sure you all have heard that term before, spend within your means. So determining your income is also an essential step in establishing how you plan to pay for things in the future, how you plan to pay for those expenses, and really determining also as well, which we're going to get to in a minute here, is how essential is that expenses or those expenses, whatever you're paying for. All right, so that covers a little bit about our income side. Let's take a look a little bit more at our expenses side. So tracking expenses, right? We talked tracking income, let's talk tracking expenses. Tracking expenses, this tends to be a little more complicated for most people than tracking income. And to understand why that is, well, we have to start by simply defining what an expense is. So think of an expense as any amount of money that you spend to pay for a good or for some sort of service. Now, why is tracking expenses such a complicated process? Well, expenses can span a lot of different categories. Most of us have 1, maybe 2 categories of income that we're getting. Expenses are like dozens in some cases. So most of the things that you're going to need or want in your life are 1, it's going to be an expense, and 2, it's going to take away from some of that income that you've got. Now, again, I'm going to ask you all to kind of engage me a little bit here. Raise your virtual hand for me if you have ever felt like you spend a lot of money without realizing just how much. So maybe you get to the end of the month, you're like, oh my gosh, I spent that amount of money? Are you serious right now? Yeah, a lot of hands on this one too. A lot of hands, right? Lord knows I've been there. Lord knows I've been there too. All right, so you can go ahead and raise your hand or lower your hands for me. I appreciate that. That really is just a testament to how expensive life can be. Tracking your expenses is a great way to identify how much income that you are getting has to go towards those expenses, whether they be essential or non-essential expenses, and how much you're going to be spending on each of those different types of expenses. So once you determine that, you can actually start making intentional spending habits, and that's the whole purpose of it. So let's look a little bit deeper into tracking our expenses. So similar to tracking income, there's a couple of different things to take a look at when you're preparing to track your expenses. Right? We're just talking about preparing now. We're not talking necessarily going into the nitty-gritty yet of budgeting, because remember, we got to, just like in our house, right? We got to find where's everything supposed to be. Where's all the different pieces of my life in terms of my money right now, right? That's the stage we're in right now. We haven't gotten to the budgeting yet. We will certainly get there. That's where we are right now, just like in our house. We're just trying to find the things right now. All right, so first, determine your expense categories, just like income categories. And we're going to talk about some different categories that you could use to track your expenses in just a little bit here. But again, determine the different types of expenses you've got. Second, ask yourself what portion of your expenses are essential and what portion are non-essential. So these are often evolving questions that you're going to be able to better answer over time as you keep tracking your expenses over time, right? As you put together your budget, you'll be able to answer that question better. What's essential and what's not? Finally, ask yourself what portions of your income is left over after your essential expenses are covered. So this is going to help you determine what budgeting strategy that you're going to use to make allocation decisions properly about any sort of extra money that you may have. And before we get ahead of ourselves, though, I want to talk a little bit about those expense categories, right? Because I said income usually falls into a couple of different categories. Expense categories, there could be quite a lot more. And there's actually 8 that we're actually going to go through here, but there may be more, there may be less, depending on your particular experience. So expense categories really fall under one of 2 larger umbrellas. There's 8 total categories, but there's really 1 or 2 large umbrellas, or sorry, 2 different large umbrellas here. So those 2 umbrellas are 1, essential, and 2, not essential. So think of them as needs, essential, and wants, not essential. Without covering all of them, right? We need things like shelter, security, sustenance, right? We need these things. If we don't cover our needs, if we don't cover our essential expenses, all of those things can be at risk. Shelter, sustenance, those types of things, right? So these looks a little bit different for everyone, but again, the following categories can really help you figure this out, help you come up with your own structure. So the first category, housing. These expenses, keep a roof over your head. Pretty plain, pretty straightforward there. If you rent, this is your rent payment. If you're a homeowner, these would be things like your mortgage payment, but not just your mortgage payment, your property taxes, your home maintenance, your homeowner association fees, if you have one of those. Next to that, we have transportation. So if you own or lease a car, you're going to have car payments, you're going to have gas, you're going to have parking, you're going to have tolls, maintenance as well, right? Maintenance, that's one thing that pops up on a lot of people. They don't think to budget for their maintenance for their car. That's a big one, right? So if you're a person who doesn't own a car, think about the cost of public transportation, right? Rideshare services, right? That would go under these sorts of things. Third category, food. Food is typically a little bit more flexible than housing or than transportation, but this is typically reserved for groceries and for groceries only. So it's really up to you to decide if takeout and dining, if those are more needs or if those are more wants. So just in this category, one of the best tips we can give you is separately track how much you spend on food in terms of groceries, and then how much you spend on restaurants, how much you spend on Grubhub, those sorts of things, to figure out, sparse those things out into smaller categories. So it's a little bit easier to track, is this more of a need or a want? I'm ordering Grubhub 4 times a week. Is that really a need? Maybe there's a better way to do this. The utilities category, last one we've got on this slide here, is services that keep your home up and running. So things like your water, electricity, HVAC, your gas, sewage bills, all those sorts of things. A lot of these bill amounts are going to vary month to month. So it's important to track your expenses over multiple months in order to determine average trends in each category. So you don't want to necessarily just look at 1 month of expenses and go, okay, good, this is what I spent. You want to look at it over the course of at least 3 months, but really 3 to 6 months is a good amount, just to make sure, okay, what's my average? What am I typically spending in each of these categories? So those are our first 4. Let's look at the next 4. Next category of insurance in terms of essential expenses. Insurance. Insurance are going to include things like health insurance, auto insurance, home association. Again, if you have one of those, renter's insurance, life insurance, disability. There are tons of different types of insurance out there. And keep in mind too, especially for my younger folks out there or just haven't done as much financial planning for themselves, if you're not paying for some of these now, you may have to in the future. So definitely a good idea to keep in mind that maybe I will be paying for 1 or 2 of these in the future. Next up is your healthcare. Any expense paid toward the cost of healthcare or products can all be included here. So things like primary care, prescription drugs, specialty care like dentistry, dermatology, any of those sorts of things would go under this category. 7 of 8, savings. This would consist of any sort of deposits that you would make towards an emergency fund, maybe toward a retirement fund or some other sort of savings goal or plan. It can also include a lot of investments as well. A lot of investments go here too. And then our final category is debt. This is where you would include any sort of debts that you have to pay on. Think credit cards, think student loan expenses, personal loans, anything like that that you would have to pay on as well. So those are just 8 categories. We've talked about some essential expense categories. As you can see, that's just the essential ones. There's a lot there. There can be a lot there. So how do we track the portion of our income left over after all of our expenses are covered? So there's a big question there to consider. And before we kind of dive into that a little bit more, let's look at some of those non-essential categories as well of things that can go in there. So despite their title, non-essential expenses, they're still very, very important, and they tend to be a little bit more flexible. And the whole goal of them is to really just enhance your overall quality of life. So let's look at each one of these. We got 4 here we're going to go through. So first is your personal spending category. Think of things like your clothes, your haircuts, shoes, gym memberships, those types of things. Furniture, home decor, that might also go here as well. And then gifts that for the people that you love as well. That'd be a good example of personal expenditures. Recreation. Recreation would be things like concerts, sporting events, vacations, just general activities. Subscriptions, that's a big one. Subscriptions is one as well to consider as well under the recreation category. Now at UMortgage, the company where I work, one of our core values is that we actually we care very, very deeply about creating what we call creating strong communities. And we've actually added a category for this to also consider when you're looking at non-essential expenses. And this category has to do with investing in your local community. So use this category as an expenses for things like making donations or supporting local businesses, those sorts of things. And then last but certainly not least, we have variable income. Variable category. Your variable category of expenses, excuse me, is for your overflow or your random expenses that we haven't necessarily talked about. So again, those are the 8 different categories that we've got. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you can take or leave these different categories depending on how they resonate with you. Some of you all will want to look at all 8. Some of you might be like, no, that doesn't really apply to me, right? What's important is that you find a structure that helps you gain awareness of your expenses and how they offset the income that you are getting. All right, so now that we've identified our different expense categories, the next step is to track your average spending per category. So the first question you have to ask yourself in terms of tracking all this stuff and figuring out how am I going to do this is, are you a person who prefers manual tracking of everything, or do you like more of an automated system of tracking? So if you prefer a more manual approach, or maybe you primarily use cash, this might be a good example of this. Create a spreadsheet for yourself. Just create a simple spreadsheet, use Google Sheets, use Excel, whatever it is, with your predetermined income and then your expense categories, and track everything manually. There are also, there's a really, really good app called Every Dollar. It's right there on your screen that provides manual tracking features as well if you're a person who wants to use an app for this. Anyone can track their expenses manually, even if you rarely use cash, right? There's lots of different ways to do this. However, for those of us that need a little bit more, let's call it detail in the way that we're tracking every single thing, right? A little more automation to kind of help us along the way, maybe a little venture help. That automation can be very easy and it can be very accurate to make sure that we're doing things properly. So on the screen there, you're going to see a list of actually 4 different apps that you can use. They're all free and they all offer automated tracking services. So I encourage you to look into every single one of them. Each one of them offers their own, unique features, and they're designed to optimize your personal experience. So just find the one that works for you. Me personally, I'm a big fan of Mint. I love Mint. I used it for a very, very long time. But everybody's got their own preferences for each one of these. So however you decide to track your income and track your expenses, the best practice is to track everything for at least 3 months so that you have an accurate average of your expenses and your income, and then you can make a much more informed decision about your budget. So again, 3 months is kind of the minimum. 3 to 6 months, that'll give you a good average from which you can make informed decisions about your budgets. To expedite the tracking step, you can a lot of these apps will even allow you to pull in bank statements and transaction records from previous months in order to kind of help, expedite that process of figuring out exactly what's my income, what's my expenses, and everything. So that's really just part 1. That's part 1 of budgeting. Is again, we're just trying to find everything, right? Just like in our clean house, we just don't know, we're trying to clean up our house. I want to know what everything is. This system right here, just kind of the basics of what we walk through, whether you manually track or you do an automated tracking system, whatever it is. This is just to help you figure out where is everything. So that's part 1 of budgeting. Part 2, let's talk about the actual strategies then. So how do you actually go about doing the budget itself? This has to do with the allocation portion. So the allocation component of budgeting really requires you to, again, we've talked about this a few times, reflecting on your values, your goals. What are your financial strengths? What are your financial weaknesses? In order to make the best intentional decisions for yourself on how you save and how you spend your money. So again, bringing back to that idea of values, right? Are your values in line with how you spend your money? Our values really shape who we are, the decisions that we make every single day. And as you explore what matters to you, consider as well, how do my financial decisions align with the values that I have, the financial habits I have, do they align with the values that I put out there every single day? Now, setting financial goals for yourself is extremely important. It's going to help you create milestones to work towards in the future. And setting small goals for yourself, setting a large goal is a great start, but setting smaller concrete milestones, little goals along the way, will help you maintain your motivation for sticking to your budget. I have to say though, that budgeting is not a perfect process. It is difficult. It has you're gonna fall down traps you hadn't thought of before. You're gonna miss something like, oh, I wish I had considered that expense. You're gonna make mistakes along the way. Whenever you hit any sort of roadblocks along your journey, trying to make sure you're budgeting properly, always come back to your values. Always come back to your values. Ground yourself in those. Am I doing the things that actually align with what I personally care about? So let's talk a little bit more about what those values are. Now, it's important to reflect on why establishing positive financial habits really matter to us. And that answer is going to be different for every single person on here. Every single person is going to look at this a little bit differently. Financial literacy this whole week is really about helping you leverage your finances to help you invest in the things that matter most to you. And now to do this, you have to identify those personal values that drive your decisions, that drive your goals, your priorities, so that way, when you do make a decision, they are more intentional. So what are the types of things that you value? Well, we've got an example. You'll walk you through one example I see on the screen here, helping others. So if helping others is something that you really, really value, you are likely to prioritize the needs of others over your own in terms of your decision-making process. So how do you leverage the fact that one of your values is helping others? Well, simply prioritize that community category of expenses that we talked about earlier. That's an opportunity for you to budget for initiatives and organizations in your local community that are intended to help out the folks in your community, right? So again, just that category, tying that category to, if that's a value that matters to you, keep that in mind. And keep those decisions, all of those decisions as mind as you go through your finances and trying to find that perfect balance between how much am I saving and how much am I spending. And speaking of balance there, finding the balance, it's all life in general, right? It's all about balance. Everything is about balance. So saving money adds value to your personal profile. It prepares you for retirement. It prepares you for educational expenses that you want to pay for other, maybe just larger goals you have in your life, maybe large vacations or buying a house, something like that. Saving endlessly, though, that also can be problematic if you're not careful, because it can result in an anxiety or maybe a reluctance to just spend any money that you have. So even if it could improve the quality of your life, you may not want to spend that money because you've just built up that habit. So spending money isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as you spend within your means. So the goal is to find a balance between saving and spending, so you can make a plan for yourself in the future while still taking some risks, while still enjoying life and spending money in a way that really resonates with you. Now, I'm going to ask for, again, some participation here from all of you all. So raise your virtual hand for me, very simply, raise your virtual hand for me if you would describe yourself as someone who has a strong balance between saving and spending. All right, a couple people, good to see, good to see. All right, I'm not gonna lie to you, there were some, exactly the amount that I thought I was gonna see. I bet you this next question, there's gonna be a lot more hands on this one. Raise your hands for me now, raise your hands for me virtually now if you feel that you have some ways to go in terms of how you're spending money and how you're saving money. Yeah, quite a few more hands, quite a few more hands there. All right, perfect, you can put your hands down, I appreciate y'all. So even the most money savvy person can really benefit from identifying a few areas where they could practice some more discipline in terms of managing their money. So we're going to explore a couple of different strengths and weaknesses for some aspects of financial health, specifically on that saving and that spending part. So let's talk about financial strengths. In terms of a strength, preparing for the future, right? Thinking about this in terms of, what's out there? What am I looking for? What does this mean? Well, saving money is all about looking ahead. A lot of us sometimes we get blinders on, right? And we focus only on what's in front of us and we don't think long-term. So whether you're working towards a short-term goal, maybe a long-term goal like building an emergency fund or planning for retirement, right? It all just depends. But saving money is going to help you minimize your stress as well as reduce really the amount of debt that you're going to have too. So saving money will also help you be able to afford larger expenses and experiences later on in life. If one of your core values, one of the things that really drives you is travel or collecting life experiences, saving is going to help you seek out those experiences with much less stress because you're going to have a little bit more leeway in terms of how much money you can spend to do certain things. Now, short-term savings plans can be good for smaller one-time expenses. So think about new furniture for your home, maybe a weekend vacation, something smaller, those sorts of things. Those types of smaller expenses, they are attainable, but they can be hard to fit into a regular monthly budget, monthly expenses. So, putting aside just $20 every pay period can create opportunity for those smaller purchases without accruing too much debt. So again, just keep that in mind. Doesn't usually take too much in order to get kind of started on the saving path. Building something like, say, an emergency fund, though, that's a much larger goal, much larger goal. So let's face it, I've said it a couple times now, life is very unpredictable. Unexpected circumstances can arise at any point. And your monthly budget, the way you have it set up right now, may not be sufficient in order to cover that. So we're going to hit on this point again because it's an important one. It's one that everybody should kind of take into account, is looking back over that 3 to 6 month period. Well, we add something else to consider to that 3 to 6 month period. Best practice is work. If you don't have an emergency fund, build one for yourself and build up an emergency fund that could sustain you for 3 to 6 months if you had no money coming in. So that 3 to 6 months, that's really kind of your sweet spot for a number of these things. Could I live in my current lifestyle? Could I do it with 3 to 6 months if I had no money coming in? Your tracking system will help you determine what that amount should look like. And then you can then determine how much you should be contributing for each pay period and how long it'll help you, how long it'll take for you to get there. Now, looking even further down the road than that, let's talk about long-term savings, right? Again, taking off the blinders, kind of looking way down the road. If family, education, if those types of things are your core values, this is where you're going to want to start to plan now for a family or a college fund and those sorts of things. And if you're more focused on attaining financial freedom at an early retirement, then you could also explore things like individual retirement accounts, IRAs, those types of things. One final note. Paying off debt is the most effective way to ensure that you're having some bandwidth to save for yourself. So if you're stuck making large debt payments each month, it may be difficult to incorporate multiple savings initiatives into your budget. So we talked earlier about making smaller goals for yourself, right? So set a smaller goal, pay things off one at a time if you can do so, and that will help you make a dent in the debt that you currently have, so that way you can invest back into yourself with some of those longer term savings plans and things like that. All right, so let's look at one more financial strength, specifically now talk about spending though. So financial strength still, but particularly in the world of spending. Most of us, again, I can certainly account for myself in this one. I'm better about it now, but I used to have big struggles with this one, is difficulty with spending. When your income is limited, but you want to afford a particular lifestyle, right? Spending can be very stress-inducing. The key word in building strong spending habits really overall is just mindfulness. When you spend intentionally, you're going to trust your decisions much, much more, right? Being mindful of your spending. It's essentially leveraging all of the elements that we've covered so far to influence your behaviors. Tracking that we talked about earlier really establishes awareness of how much money you have and where it's going. So determining where your values are, right, will help you align what you're spending on and with where you should be or what you want to be spending your money on. And then again, creating a budget will help you initiate a level of accountability for ourselves. That's what we talked about earlier. We talked about budgets and how they help us with accountability. So before you make a purchase, take the time, pause and reflect. What expense category does whatever it is you're about to pay for, what does it fall into? What's the bandwidth for making this purchase, whatever that is? Does it align with your values? Another question to think about. While this can be a great approach to reducing some compulsive spending out there, it's also important to indulge a little bit. It's okay to indulge a little bit every once in a while, right? You want to celebrate those moments where you did something properly, right? Or celebrate yourself, whatever that is. So one of the ways in which you can create a little room for yourself to spend comfortably is to create something we call an open spending account. So think about all the things that you love to treat yourself to, but they add up over time if you don't set some sort of limit. So that open spending category will help you gauge how frequently you can afford random extras that don't get factored into your typical budget. So you can still practice mindful spending, but if you want a portion of your income that goes towards open spending, there is a controlled way to do that, right? And using that open spending category in your expenses can certainly help you to do that, right? Give yourself a little bit of an opportunity to celebrate yourself for doing something right or well, whatever it is. All right, so a couple of financial weaknesses that we also want to take a look at. Before we talk specifically about those weaknesses in particular, though, there is something that we should go over real quick. And that is, again, the note that financial literacy is a very, very complex topic. It's hard for people to take a lot of this stuff in or just receive education in the first place in order to control their finances properly. So we fall into a lot of problematic habits when we do, because we haven't been educated on a lot of this stuff. Because most of us are going to have a fixed income, setting realistic goals is one of the most crucial components in achieving those goals. So what does an unrealistic savings goal look like? Well, for example, A debt repayment or savings goal may be unrealistic for you if it already exceeds what your current budget is. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. We've got one here on the screen here for you. Let's say you're 24. You have currently $10,000 currently saved, and you set a goal to save $1 million by the time you get to be 30 years old. You still want to pay off a significant student loan, and you still have some credit card debt you have to pay for. Now, do me a solid here real quick. Just look at this little scenario here, right? Put yourself in Shannon's shoes. Do you think that this would be a realistic savings goal to get to $1 million from 10,000 in the course of 6 years? Raise your virtual hands for me if you think that's possible. Yeah, didn't think so, right? It's going to be tough, right? It's going to be tough. In this case, we don't know exactly Shannon's exact income, but the median income for 24-year-olds as of today is just shy of $35,000 per year. So saving $1 million in just 6 years is likely to be a very steep uphill climb for you and Shannon. So you want to set realistic goals for yourself, and setting unrealistic goals can be a recipe for disaster if you're not careful, right? It can cause a lot of anxiety, it can cause a lot of stress, and really just have that defeated mindset. You want to be careful. So you want to be very, very careful here. It's great to challenge yourself, and you want to be careful about it, but your goals should be attainable. And again, you can break these things down into smaller pieces. So that way, if you've got a loftier goal, break it down into smaller pieces in terms of your budget, so you can make accurate calculations on how to get there and determine what your parameters are, and then establish how long it would take for you to actually get to those smaller goals in light of the bigger one. And then from that point on, it really is all about accountability. How well are you sticking to your goals? Are you using the budget you're supposed to be using? Are there unexpected expenses that you weren't consistently planning for, right? Are you looking for those things? Do they need to be accounted for, right? So all of these things are very, very, very important to keep into account. Money management is really all a learning process. So it takes time. You have to set goals for yourself, realistic goals for yourself, and you may not get to those goals at the rate at which you expect to. Lord knows when I started to budget, let's call it properly, I was a little defeated at first because I didn't get to where I thought I was going to be as quickly as I wanted to get there, right? And that's okay. You're forming habits. That's what it's all about. As you go through this process, you're going to stumble, you're going to trip, you're going to fall, you're not going to do it properly, you're going to miss something. These are habits. You're forming habits, right? And it takes time for habits to form. So take the small wins that you get. The skills that you're acquiring will help you towards the success overall that you're trying to find for yourself. So a couple of spending practices that we want to avoid. We want to avoid as we're going through this. On one end of the spending spectrum, there are lots of people who are compulsive spenders, right? Or they spend in a compulsive manner. On the other hand, there are people who are spending avoidant. So in the middle, we typically see a combination of the two. Now, this typically comes from someone's predetermined mindset. Are they compulsive or are they more of an avoidant person about spending? It usually comes from their predetermined mindset about how they spend money in the first place, or just spending money in general. So as an example, let's take a look at the more common of the, not more common, but one that I'm sure most of you are more familiar with. I'm sure we all know someone like this in our lives, the compulsive spender. So think about this one. Just kind of ponder this one on your own in your head, right? Are you someone who frequently makes unnecessary purchases and then feels buyer's remorse afterwards? Are you one of those people? Do you spend money when you're particularly stressed or anxious? Or maybe you're looking for some sort of immediate gratification? Are you one of those folks? Are you someone who spends money really when you know you shouldn't be because you know you can't afford it, right? Things to consider there, things to consider there. A couple other questions to consider for yourself, right? Do you just have general anxiety or stress around spending, right? Do you find yourself holding back from trying new things because you don't want to pay for it? Are you constantly in fear of losing money, right? All of these sorts of things. So in terms of the compulsive person and the more avoidant person, right? Those are two different kind of mindsets that people can have. And again, they're just questions for you to ponder there, right? Again, finding balance between those two segments, those two types of mindsets, it's a process. It takes some time. And overall, just take the time always, if you're ever in the situations where you're answering yes to either one of those questions, whether you're more of a compulsive spender or maybe you're an avoidant spender, is just pause. Just think about it. Just reflect for a few seconds and figure out, okay, how do they align to my values? Am I setting things up the way that I should be? Do I know where everything is? Take a look at all that stuff, because once you, again, have all those pieces in place, then you can start talking about an actual budgeting strategy and finding that balance. All right, so the budgeting strategies themselves. What is a budgeting strategy? Well, there's lots of different budgeting strategies out there, but they are formal approaches, or they can be informal approaches or techniques that you can use to manage your finances. Once you track income, once you track your expenses and are ready to make some adjustments to both of those things, right? We know where everything is in our house now, right? I've got everything pulled down. I'm smart about where my values are now. Okay, now it's time to choose a budgeting strategy. What's going to work best with me? Again, like everything we talked about today, everybody's going to take this a little bit differently. And before we go into this, let's talk about 4 specific strategies that we're going to go through here. And I want to encourage, again, these are just 4. There are tons of different strategies out there, but I encourage you all to do your own research or just get creative and come up with a strategy for yourself. Maybe pulling a couple threads from a few of these different ones that works for you. So let's take a look at a couple of the different strategies here. So we're going to start from kind of the most simple first and get into ones that are more granular, very, very specific. So the first one is a strategy called ratio-based budgeting. Ratio-based budgeting focuses at looking at allocating certain percentages of the income that you've got towards essential and non-essential expenses. So let's look at one of the types of strategies for this ratio-based budgeting. First one's called 50-30-20 strategy. So simply, this would mean that you allocate 50% of your income towards essential expenses. Simple. 30% of your income would go towards non-essential expenses, and then finally 20% would go towards debt repayments, investments, savings, those types of things. The next one we have under the ratio-based budgeting system here is called the 70-20-10 strategy. So again, if you're someone who's very excited, we've been using the community category of expenses. We talked about that a couple times earlier here. This strategy might be interesting to you if you're a person who highly values the community category of expenses. So allocating 70% of your income towards your essential expenses and towards your non-essential expenses. The next section there would be the 20%. Allocate 20% towards savings and in your investing goals. And then the final 10% would go towards donations or other things to the community, things that, again, aligns more so with your values. There are a couple benefits to these two, or really one type of strategy, but just 2 different examples of it. The first benefit to this one is that it's more of it's a structured budgeting system without too much restriction for you as a person. So if you don't like having a whole lot of restriction on you, and where every single dollar is going, right, then this category might be good for you. Or sorry, this strategy might be good for you because, again, the categories are fairly broad and you still have some freedom to kind of decide what you do with sorts of things. And again, it's a very simple system. There's really only 2 steps. Allocate how much money you have into your 3 different categories and you're done, right? Spend accordingly to wherever you need to go. So it really just depends. So long as you hold yourself accountable to the strategy that you're putting into place, you're likely to see success with this one. Now, a couple of limitations with this one is if you're a person who's living more paycheck to paycheck, the percentage-based strategies may not be as easy to implement for you. And that's okay because there's other budgeting strategies out there. And again, if you're a person who just needs that more structure, this is really not going to give it to you because, again, you might be finding yourself spending more than you want to in certain areas. So again, get creative. You can get creative with some of these approaches, but that's just the first one there for you to walk you through that. Now let's look at our next strategy. Next strategy is called the value-based strategy. So this is where you would spend leftover money and you would consistently reallocate that money towards expenses that align with your values. So for example, let's just say that your physical health is really, really important to you. So you care a lot about your physical health, but you avoid things like going to the dentist or you avoid primary care, going to see the doctor. Your first step really should be, because you do care about this is a value you have. So you should really go back and evaluate where are you spending all of your other money. Consider where that money is going and can you cut some expenses down so that you can put money towards the value that you really do care about, which is your physical health. This strategy can be really good for leading to a sense of fulfillment for yourself because you're aligning, again, yourself with your values, your spending habits with your values, really. And they can also have an impact on the community by, again, spending your money consciously. So this process typically takes a lot more planning, a lot more research, a lot more time, but it's all a part of just gaining and control your finances. That's what it's all about there. I've got one final budget system we're going to take a look at here, the envelope system. So I can speak personally to this one because I am a person who needs this amount of structure. I don't necessarily need it as much anymore, but when I was first learning how to budget, this was huge for me. This is huge. It really, really saved me. So the envelope system, how does this work? If you're a person who needs a lot of structure, you're going to want to listen up for this one for sure. For this one, all you're going to need is simply a pen and some envelopes. Label each envelope that you've got for some type of expense category that you plan to spend a portion of your income towards, right? So entertainment, your car, gas, those sorts of things, right? You can put as many things on those envelopes as you want. And then what you do is you actually go to the ATM and you pull out the actual amount of money that you need to spend on that particular thing, and you put it into each one of the envelopes. And what it does here, it holds you super accountable. It holds you super accountable because you can only spend as much as you've put in the envelope. So if you're putting money in the envelope for going out to restaurants, right? Oh man, you go out twice in the first week of the month. Like, oh man, all right, that's all my money. I can't spend it anymore. So it helps hold you accountable, because otherwise you have to go back to the ATM and draw out a whole bunch of more money, right? Which is an actual extra step you have to take. So as you can tell, there's a lot of, this system is great for those of you that need that very granular, I guess, accountability or oversight over yourself. It's really good for that because it does hold you to doing those very, very particular things. And again, you can get extremely granular with each one of those envelopes and how far you go. So this strategy is a really, really good one for those that tend to overspend. Again, that's why I adopted it back in the day, because I was a person who tended to overspend. And it may be good for those that struggle to really prioritize where they're spending money on their non-essential expenses. Now, a couple of drawbacks of this one. This strategy may not be great for those of you that may have a tendency to misplace things, because you are now have a bunch of cash and a bunch of envelopes floating around. So you have to be very, very careful, right? Very, very careful there. I definitely wouldn't recommend using it while you're traveling overseas or anything like that necessarily. So again, just being careful, those sorts of things, because this system can be great for those of us that need the help, but it also can be a detriment if you're a person who loses things, because you're going to lose track of those very, very easily. So those are just a couple of different budgeting systems that we have out there. Again, there's tons more. There's a lot of different ways to do this stuff. And I encourage each and every one of you to get a little creative. Find a system that works best for you, like everything that we talked about. Find the system that works best for you. Well, all right, my friends, we've reached the end of our little presentation here. And again, just as a reminder, we're not financial advisors. What we wanted to do here was just to give you some educational tips, tricks, things that will help you figure out what your budgeting system could look like. Looking at that value-based system, do I know where all of my expenses are? Do I know where all my income is, right? It was just for educational purposes. It doesn't take into account any sort of financial objectives that you have in particular. So if you are looking to get a much more granular and much more individualized way of looking at all of your expenses and your income and everything, your whole financial situation, we highly advise that you seek the advice of a licensed financial advisor if necessary. So thank you all so much. Now we have reached our little Q&A here. So we've got about 8 minutes left or so. We do want to promise anybody, if you would like to ask a question, we highly encourage you all to jump into that Q&A feature of the Zoom system here and drop a question there, and I'll do my best to answer it for you. Like I said, we're going to stick around for about 8 minutes or so. And if we don't get to everybody's question, worry not, my friends. We're going to make sure that we reach back out to you after today's session and get you a specific answer in an email, so along those lines. All right, let's see here. A couple of questions here. All right, so first one, great question. All right, so how often should I be updating my budget? Great question. How often do I update my budget? I can definitely speak from personal experience on this one. Anytime you have any sort of major change in your life, so think of things like getting a raise, or God forbid, losing your job. Maybe here's a good one because it happened to me once, is your rent increases or your mortgage payment increases, whatever it is, right? Anytime you have any sort of major change in the way in which you expect to spend money, I would go back and reflect and tweak the budget as need be. So it isn't just one thing where you set a budget for a month and you just leave it there, set a budget and you're like, great, I've got my monthly budget, because most people use monthly. I got my monthly budget and I expect it not to change for a year, from now. That's not it's not going to help you, right? Go back every once in a while. I would probably say every other month, right? If you're looking for more of a time frame way of looking at this, every other month, go back, check your budget again. Is it still working the way you're supposed to? That's out there. Or if you have some sort of major life change happen to you, getting a raise, losing your job, or again, your rent goes up, something like that, then I would change it there as well. Or take a look at it again. Let's see here. Oh, Great question here. So my partner and I want to create a shared budget. What is a good resource to budget for dual income and expenses, right? I mean, that is more, I'll make sure I'm reading them. Yes, okay. So a good resource. I want to make sure I read the question correctly. So a resource. My suggestion here, again, I'm a big fan of Mint. I personally love Mint, but it really, you can use Mint for more than one person, like, you and a partner. But I would honestly suggest Honeydew, that app. Honeydew, the app is amazing, amazing. Great for designing a shared budget. I'm much better now about my budgeting than I used to be. But if I wish I had known about Honeydew when I first got into Mint, because I had just met my wife at the time, and we were kind of learning how to budget together and those sorts of things. And I think Honeydew probably would have done better for us. But since I already had Mint, I kind of just stuck with it, so that worked out well. But again, Honeydew is a great one. I would highly check that one out. That's a good one there. Oh, let's see here. Looking through everything. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. Perfect. All right, so I have been budgeting for about 6 months, and there hasn't been a single month that I stuck to my plan. What am I doing wrong? All right. Couple of things just to consider, because I've been here too. Go back and I would start with the values first. Look at your goals. Yeah, look at your goals, look at your values, right? Are you leaving yourself enough wiggle room in terms of the goals and the things that you value, in terms of essential spending and non-essential spending? Are you being smart about it? The other thing too, and I can definitely speak to this, is being way too restrictive on your budget off the bat, especially with that envelope system, because again, that's the one I used in order to get really good at budgeting, but decent at budgeting. Is use that envelope system, but be careful about only allowing yourself $10 in order to go out and eat out for restaurants, right? That's not going to work. It's not going to work over the course of a month. So just be careful. Is it too restrictive? Or on the flip side, is it too flexible? I know over the course of the 3 months or so, when I was trying to dial in exactly what my budget should be, there were certain areas where I was way over. I think not concerts, but sporting events were a big one for me. I spent a lot of money to go watch hockey. That's my favorite sport. And I would spend a lot more money to go watch hockey than I should. And that got me, because I was a little bit too flexible on how much money I should be spending for that every single month. So just go back and ask yourself, am I being too restrictive? Am I being too flexible on certain categories? That will certainly help you. And then the last one is, I really kind of kicked things off with Mint. That's where I went in terms of figuring out how my expenses were going to work. But I know that when I first started, I was too broad in my categories. So I, for example, would use just like food as a category, and then I realized, oh, wait a minute, hold on. There's a lot of different ways in which I can eat food. I can go to the grocery store, I can get it from the grocery store, I can go to a restaurant, I can order something from lunch from a local cafe that's in my area, that sort of thing. So once I broke it down into smaller categories, that's when I started to figure like, oh, I'm struggling to stick to my budget because I'm way over on one area and way under on another. So if you're not sure, that's the third thing I would suggest, is go back and look at the different categories you have and see if you can make them smaller. Just like a goal, right? Big lofty goal. See if you can make goals smaller. You want to do the same thing with your expenses. Can I change my expenses up a little bit, make them smaller, so that way it's easier more transparent. My expenses are way more transparent. All right, we got time for one more question because it's 2:58, and I got 2 questions left here. Don't worry, if I don't get your question, I promise you I will get you an answer. How do I find time to budget? How do I find time to budget? Ooh, that's a big one, because that dives into our whole time management side of things as well. The biggest thing I would suggest here is do it in small chunks. Find just 10 minutes of your day, 5 minutes of your day. I'm sure many of you, like myself, spend way too much time just mindlessly scrolling through YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. Remove one of those a day, because let's be honest, I'm sure all of you have multiple times of the day you're doing that. Remove one of those, schedule it, put it on your time, on your calendar. Is it the last 10 minutes before you go to sleep? Is it the first thing you do when you get up in the morning, right? You can do it while you're brushing your teeth. That's 3-4 minutes right there. Just do it in small chunks, do it in small pieces, because the way you're going to establish a new habit for yourself in terms of budgeting and budgeting correctly is to just make small progress on every day, right? Habits don't happen in one day, they happen over the course of time. So budget a small section of it for yourself, right? Budget your time just like you're budgeting your money. Find 10 minutes, just do it every single day. Do it every single day. That would be the suggestion I have. So, all right, my friends, it is 2:59. I want to be respectful of your time as well. I know all of you have extremely busy lives that I'm sure you want to get back to. and hopefully take some of these things and utilize them in your life and learn about, or put these things into practice. So I wish you all the best in terms of budgeting and finding things that work for you. And thank you all for attending today's training as part of Financial Literacy Week. And we hope to see you in many, many more of these. Free education in terms of financial literacy. That's what it's all about. I wish I'd known this stuff when I was much, much younger. And I hope you all can take some things out of this today and become smarter and better informed consumers. So ladies and gentlemen, I bid you adieu and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your Monday.
The recording has stopped.